Thanks for joining me on episode 482 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
Hey there, I'm Cassidy Cash, the host of That Shakespeare Life. If you'd like to impact the world one day like Shakespeare, one way to do that is listening to this. It's Inspired Stewardship Podcast with my friend Scott Mater.
Because one of the most important days in my life was the day that I realized that there was a God, and one of the second most important was the day that I realized that God wasn't me. I didn't need to be the decider of all things. I could open up my heart to others and just love on them, and that was all I was called to do. I didn't have to worry about the rest of it.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world.
In today's Spiritual Foundation episode about investing in others, I talk with you about why listening is a spiritual exercise, how the wisdom of listening is vital and often overlooked, and how important listening is to building friendships and connections. Let's talk about listening. You know, when you really want to invest and care for others, this is probably the single number one thing you have to learn how to do. And that is to really listen to someone else. Listening to someone beyond just the words that they say, but listening for the meaning behind it, listening for the emotion that they feel, listening for the stories that they're telling in the things that they say without even actually using words. You know, this is a skill that I've had to really work to cultivate, and I still work on developing it. I definitely am not perfect at it today. In fact, far from it. But I've discovered that listening to someone else is a truly spiritual exercise. It has the ability to open up your heart and your mind and your soul to another person in a way that few things do. Sometimes that listening is listening to the words that they say, and sometimes that listening is just being with someone silently beside them while they grieve or while they deal with an emotion that they can't even express in words. All of these are acts of listening to another person and listening to what they need and what they say and what they do. And listening not so that you can find the break or the chance to speak yourself, not so that you can find the opportunity to pour into someone else with words yourself, but listening to understand what the other person is saying, listening to connect to the other person at the depth of your soul. This wisdom in today's world is often overlooked. If you walk around for a few minutes, if you look at the TV, if you look at social media, even if you just look at how we interact with each other in a day-to-day moment, we generally are looking for opportunities to spread our message, or others are looking for opportunities to spread their message to us. If you listen for more than 5 minutes, all you hear is a huge volume of voices all shouting at you with their own message and their own intentions and what they want you to do and what they want you to hear and what they want you to think. This isn't a political statement, but it occurs on both sides of the aisle. We're so busy screaming what we think and what we believe and what we know to be truth that we can't even hear whether the other side agrees or disagrees, because by definition, we're not listening to them. We're not paying attention to what they say. I honestly think one of the biggest things that separates us nowadays from each other, from having dialogue and making connections to others that are not exactly like us is this art of listening. I know whenever I've taken the opportunity to actually shut up and listen to someone else, I've discovered connections that I never would have seen or expected. Someone who didn't look like me, someone who didn't sound like me, someone who didn't have the history that I have, somebody that at first glance would never be someone that I would be a friend with or connect with, actually has turned into some of the best friends that I have. And I've discovered that by listening to other people. Listening is probably the single biggest factor for making a connection to someone else. If you look in the Bible, there are tons of passages about the art of listening and the power of listening. Lots of them talk about the connections that we have and that we make when we listen to each other. Just picking a couple out, Proverbs chapter 18, verse 13, to answer before listening, that is folly and shame. In other words, to draw a conclusion before you've actually listened to what the other person has to say is stupid, folly, and it's shameful. It makes you less of a person. It makes you less worthy of honor. James chapter 1 verse 19 says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." Think how much better conversations could be in the world today if we all took these two pieces of advice to heart. If we began to listen before we answered, and if we began to be quicker to listen than we are to speak, and definitely quicker to listen than we are to be angry at each other. Because I don't know about you, but oftentimes I think that the only thing I hear from everyone is how angry and offended they are at everyone else and how everyone should do and say and believe and act just the way they are. And I'll be honest, I take that on myself sometimes. There's days that I wonder why everyone doesn't just think the way I think, believe the way I believe, look the way I look, think and do everything. If everyone would just do what I said, the world would be such a better place. But the truth is, the world would not be a better place, because one of the most important days in my life was the day that I realized that there was a God. And one of the second most important was the day that I realized that God wasn't me. I didn't need to be the decider of all things. I could open up my heart to others and just love on them. And that was all I was called to do. I didn't have to worry about the rest of it. That would all be taken care of by someone who's way above my pay grade. So I encourage you to find time, find space, and begin to just listen to the people around you before you begin to speak to invest in others. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you enjoyed this episode, do me a favor. Go over to facebook.com/inspired stewardship and like our Facebook page and mark it that you'd like to get notifications from us so that we can connect with you on Facebook and make sure that we're serving you to the best of our abilities with time and tips there. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact the world.